So I'm going to give you guys my top 10 TV shows of all time, and this is not a ranking based upon what I think are the best shows ever made. This is my personal favorites, personal preference, so it's going to be just based upon, rewatchability, how much it affected me, how much I identify with the characters, shows I grew up with, that kind of stuff is all going to be factored in here, so it's obviously going to be very different than anybody else's list. I would recommend that you put your top 10 TV show list down below, as well as TV show recommendations, because I want you to kind of consider this video to be like a recommendation video, because other than the top 10, I am going to mention a bunch of honorable mentions or TV shows that I really enjoy that didn't really quite hit the top 10. So consider this video a recommendation video, as well as just talking about the things that we enjoy. I've been meaning to make a TV show centric video for quite a while, and I figured why not start with like a top 10 ranking, and then maybe at some point in the future we can go a little bit more in depth with these shows as well. This year, I'm going to make it a point to watch a couple of shows that I've been meaning to watch for a very, very long time. It's taken me a while to get to some of these shows. I only just watched TheSopranos last year for the first time. So these are the shows that I want to watch in 2024 or get to at some point this year. So I'm not going to be including them in this list. But in case you're wondering, where is this show? These are the shows I'm looking to get to this year. So Mr. Robot, I want to watch this year. A lot of people talk about that. The Wire is a show that's critically acclaimed and like always talked about in best of lists. I've never seen it, so I want to watch The Wire this year. Midnight Mass is a horror show that a lot of people have been asking me to watch, and it looks really interesting that I want to get to, so that's another one. And Peaky Blinders is one that I hear talked about quite often too, that I really want to get to. So I think those are going to be my top priority this year, to try to get to those shows, try to watch through them, so that by next year, if I do an updated top 10 list, I can include all of those. Now, I also want to include a bunch of honorable mentions here. I'm going to talk about a couple of shows here that I really, really enjoy, but they just aren't like top 10 level, because 10's a very small number. You know what I mean? Like, it's hard to be in a top 10. Anyways, but here's a couple of shows that I really enjoy. One I want to talk about that I don't hear talked about too often anymore is the show Heroes. And maybe the reason why it's not talked about much anymore is because of just how badly this show fell off. And it fell off bad. It fell off hard. It was a victim of the writer's strike back in like 2008 or something. And then every season after the first season just got progressively worse and worse and worse. But I will say confidently that I still think the first season of Heroes is one of the best seasons of television that I've ever watched. If it was just that singular season, if there was no more seasons and it was only season one, it might be top 10 worthy. I love season one of Heroes. I would say check it out if you've never seen it. But after you finish season one, continue at your own discretion. Other shows, if we're sticking in like the superhero genre, there's some other shows that I really enjoyed. I really liked the Netflix Daredevil series. I thought was good. The Netflix Punisher series I also thought was really good. The show Arrow on CW. Now, I know CW shows get a lot of shit, but the first like 2 or 3 seasons of Arrow I really enjoyed. It was a lot more grounded. It was less silly, less over the top, less wacky, a little bit more serious, in tone. Because when Arrow first started, they kind of treated Arrow like Batman. And the first 2 seasons, I think, are really good. The second season with Deathstroke as the main villain, it was good. And then it fell off. I never even finished it. I think I never watched the last 2 seasons. Other shows I want to mention similar to that is The Walking Dead. That's a show that I loved when it started. I followed it from episode 1, the day the first episode premiered. I watched it. I kept up with it every week. And after about I think it peaked like the problem with Walking Dead was it was never consistent in its quality. Like season 1 was really good, season 2 was okay, season 3 was like and then season 5 was probably the peak, and then after that it just all went downhill. I felt like that show just dragged on, like storylines that could be taken and done with in like 3 episodes, they would stretch out to entire seasons. I felt like they didn't care about their audience at some point. They weren't really building to anything. Things just kind of meandered and just kind of the same repetition. And then they ended the show by just splitting it off into like 10 different like spin-off series instead of actually ending the show. It's just like absolutely ridiculous. Anyways, just quickly so this video doesn't go on forever. Other shows that I really, really enjoyed. The Boys. I really like The Boys. I think it's a really great show, but just not quite top 10 worthy for me, but I really enjoy it. Game of Thrones, I just watched for the first time again last year, and it was very rocky for me. There was moments, I think it has really high peaks, but very, very low lows. It has some really good moments, but not top 10 for me. When it comes to sitcoms, I'm not really a big sitcom guy, but there are a couple that stand out. I really liked How I Met Your Mother. When that was on back in the day, I thought it was cool to see a journey about a guy struggling to date and going through all these life lessons and stuff. It's a little bit harder to watch now that I'm older and I have my own life lessons to look back on it with, because I kind of disagree with a lot of stuff now, but at the time I really, really enjoyed it. And then That 70s Show is also a sitcom that I really enjoy, and that probably most of that is because I grew up watching it. It came out when I was really young, and I watched it all through high school. But I've always been a huge fan of that show and Mila Kunis for reasons. Anyway, so now without any further ado, let's get into the official top 10. At my number 10 spot, I have BoJack Horseman. This was a show that took me by surprise. I literally didn't really know about it, had no interest in it until I was at a friend's house and they were watching season 2, and I just started watching some of the episodes, and I just started to be really captivated because, yes, it is like animal people, but the story is about this aging actor who was in this very, very famous TV show back in the day, and now he's older and he's, constantly drinking, constantly depressed, constantly making horrible decisions, and it's actually like a really honest look at what it's like to be cripplingly depressed, but also not giving you an out to say you're only a victim. Like he's responsible for all of the horrible things that he does. So it doesn't excuse his actions, but it kind of puts you in the lens of what it's like to be a really depressed person. And I think it's one of the most honest looks at depression that I've ever seen in any form of media. My number 9 is a very recent show, and to be fair, it might be recency bias putting it in the top 10, but I'm going to say Barry. It's another show that really took me by surprise. I'd heard people talking about it, and I'm a big Bill Hader fan to begin with, and when I started watching it, I was just really, really taken aback by how well structured the show was and how it balanced the dark humor with the really serious aspects of it. It's about a hitman, a guy that's kind of really psychologically damaged and very easily manipulated. And he decides that he wants to be an actor because he has to assassinate somebody that's taking this acting class. So he goes there to kind of recon or whatever to see what's going on. And he just kind of falls in love with the idea of acting. And it's sort of getting to be somebody else that's not yourself, because he's not really anybody. He's just this empty vessel that murders people. And there's a lot of dark humor here. There's sometimes the humor goes a little bit too far for me, where it's just I like the more serious aspects of the show as opposed to the comedy aspects. But Bill Hader's performance is amazing, and I think season 3 is one of the best seasons of television I've ever seen. Season 4, the final season, I still think is good, but I think that it peaked in season 3. But season 4 is still good enough that I consider the whole show to be fantastic. At my number 8, we're going old school. I'm going The Twilight Zone. The original The Twilight Zone, black and white, back in the day, Rod Serling. I still think The Twilight Zone is one of the best shows ever made. I think it holds up to this day. I think a lot of media that you see in the horror and sci-fi genre owes a ton to the Twilight Zone. If you don't know what the Twilight Zone is, for some reason, it is a anthology series, so every episode is different. Every episode tackles a completely different storyline with completely different characters, and it's usually a sci-fi kind of weird existential scenario that characters are in. There's an episode that I love called The Monsters on Maple Street, I think it's called, where the whole town believes that somebody in their town is an alien in disguise, trying to destroy them. And so the whole town gets paranoid, trying to kill each other, basically. And then the twist of the episode is, at the end, it pans up to the aliens that are actually sitting on the mountaintop, and they were we didn't even have to do anything. All we had to do was turn some of their lights off and mess with their machines, and they'll destroy themselves. Humanity will destroy themselves, and we don't even have to lift a finger. So every episode kind of has that twist ending, and it kind of is a commentary on humanity or just something that was going on that I think that is still relevant to this day. I think a lot of the commentary that it makes on society or the satire of it, I think really holds up to this day. I love the series. They used to do marathons of it every single New Year's Eve, and so that's kind of like a tradition that I still like to hold at least a little bit. I still like to watch at least a couple of episodes of Twilight Zone every New Year's Eve. Definitely say it holds up. Still watch it. Speaking of satire, at my number 7 spot, I am putting South Park. South Park is one of those shows that I think has continued to stay relevant, stay hilarious, and even though the last maybe like 2 or 3 seasons haven't been as good, I don't think it's fallen off nearly as hard as a lot of the other adult animated shows like Simpsons or Family Guy or like every other show. And I think the reason is because South Park always stays relevant with things that are currently happening in the world and currently happening with society. And what I love about South Park is that like everybody is fair game. Everybody is fair to be made fun of. It doesn't matter what it is, what your religion is, what your race is, what your political affiliation is. Everybody is under the same blanket. And in a way, that is kind of like this, that's kind of like a collective, community sort of thing where it's just like we're all silly. We're all ridiculous. We all have like, stupid things about us that are worthy of being made fun of. And so you have to kind of like, take that barrier off yourself and just like be open to the fact of like pointing out the silly things that are happening in the world. And I always thought South Park did a really good job at that. Like they were very good at picking out the most ridiculous aspects of society, blowing them out of proportion in the episode. But if you really look at it, if you really look at a lot of the episodes, you can kind of reflect on it and be like, yeah, like why are we so stuck up about particular things? It's a really good look at humanity. I think that if you study South Park, I think that you can get like as stupid as ridiculous as this is, even though there's some episodes where, Randy is just trying to like poop out a giant turd or like the Virgin Mary is period blood all over people's faces. There are still really intelligent things in South Park that it has to say. At my number 6 spot, and this is definitely like my bias, my personal preference, but it is Ash versus the Evil Dead. Now, Evil Dead is one of my favorite horror franchises of all time, and I always wanted that 4th movie. I always wanted Evil Dead 4. I always wanted to continue the journey of Ash. Eventually, we got the Evil Dead remake or, reimagining or whatever without Ash, and I thought we were done. I thought that was the nail in the coffin and we would never get Ash back again. But then we got Ash versus Evil Dead, the TV show, which is everything that I wanted it to be and more. Not only do you get a ton more because it's a TV show as opposed to like a 90-minute movie, but also the show was able to go as hardcore and edgy as they possibly could. Every episode, characters are getting covered in blood. Every episode, there's character deaths. They were allowed to swear. They were allowed to do whatever they wanted. It wasn't really restricted. And I thought they really paid a lot of honor and respect to the original trilogy. I thought that they brought a lot of things back that, they tried to make the timeline make as much sense as possible. I love that they returned to the cabin at the end of season 1. Also, you get a lot of great new characters like Kelly and Pablo. You get a lot of great new demons like Elagos from season 1, a lot of different demon creatures. And I think it really does an amazing job at balancing the comedy and the horror. And honestly, I think other than like Evil Dead 2, it is like the perfect like representation of Evil Dead when it comes to balancing horror and comedy. I think it's as good as it possibly could have been. And the only downside is that, well, it ended. At my number 5 spot, and this might seem too low for some people, but there's reasons why my top 4 are my top 4. Number 5 is TheSopranos. Sopranos obviously is one of the most renowned, famous shows of all time. It's usually number 1 on everyone's top 10 list. And if I was doing like top 10 best shows ever made, I'd probably put it at number 2. But, it holds up to what everyone says it is. It is a masterpiece of a show. I think you just have to go into it with the right intentions because it is kind of like, it's not a show that has necessarily an overarching like plot and narrative, although there is that stuff in there, but it's much more of a character study. It's much more, I guess, a slice of life series, but starring mafia members. The complexity of the character of Tony Soprano and what they try to do with him in the series and how much you understand why he thinks the way he does and how much you understand why he makes the decisions he does. I think that's one of the best examples of character writing is because if you can watch a character do horrible things and say horrible things and commit horrible actions, but the writing is done well enough to where you understand every single decision the character makes, and in a way, even root for him on some occasions, or, most occasions, really, it is really a testament to the writing. I think the show is pretty much a masterpiece. There's only I have minor nitpicks with it, but mostly I do think it's a masterpiece, and I hate that I waited so long to watch it. Also, it was just the 25th anniversary of the premiere the other day, so kind of crazy. Okay, my top 4 are really hard to rank, and I'll tell you why. Because 2 of these shows take place in the same universe, and then the other 2 shows take place in their same universe. So it's really hard in my mind to detach both the shows from a single entity, because now that I've seen both of them, it's kind of like you can't have one show without the other. So how do I rank them? How do and the only way I can think to do it is just my top 2 have to be my top 2. I know what my top 2 are. So these top 4, they all go together. You know what I mean? There's really no gigantic difference. There's no gigantic gap between these 4. They all just kind of go together. All right, but we're going to alternate because the top 2 have to be my top 2. So at number 4, I have the series Angel, which is, of course, a spinoff from Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Angel is one of my favorite shows of all time because I love the Buffy universe to begin with, but it's a show about redemption. It's a show about regrets of the past. If you don't know about it, Angel is a vampire that is cursed with his human soul. So he has his soul back, so he has all his conscience and feeling and whatever. So, he has all this remorse and guilt from all the people he killed when he was evil, all the people that, whose lives he destroyed. And when he was a vampire, he was the worst, most sadistic vampire ever. So he has his soul back, and he's trying to do right. He's trying to make amends. And, obviously there's a lot of fighting with demons and monsters and other vampires and stuff. But the core theme of the show is sort of that fight and that struggle about just trying to do the right thing and how difficult it is, where, choosing the darker path is always the easier route. And so I think the show has a lot of really great things to say about redemption. I think the character of Wesley has an amazing character arc. And it's just it's just a fantastic show that I've always loved. So in number 3, obviously, number 4 is going to be related to my number 2, and my number 3 is going to be related to my number 1. Number 3, of course, now has to be Better Call Saul. And I know I was hesitant on Better Call Saul. Listen, the reason is because I think Breaking Bad is the greatest show ever made. Obviously, it's going to be my number 1. So after Breaking Bad, I didn't want any more because I didn't want to ruin a perfect thing, And also, when I started watching Better Call Saul, I will admit the first 2 seasons I wasn't quite as on board for. By season 3, that started to change. By season 4, that really started to change. By season 5, I realized season 5 has some of the best episodes of television I have ever seen. And I couldn't believe how good this show had gotten. And with going back and rewatching season 1 and season 2 and seeing how it plays into the rest of the series, it just gave me a whole new appreciation for it. So I was absolutely wrong. I was wrong to ignore the show as long as I did, and I was wrong to find season 1 and season 2 to be slow. I was absolutely wrong. So now I can't differentiate this show from the Breaking Bad universe. It just is part of it to me. So obviously moving on, my number 2 and number 1. Number 2 is Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And that's not saying that Buffy is a better show than Better Call Saul. It's just Buffy was my favorite show of all time before I got into the Breaking Bad universe. And I grew up with Buffy. I have a lot of core memories with Buffy. I watched Buffy when I was younger. And if you don't know, Buffy, obviously she's the chosen one, the vampire slayer. But the show is about growing up. And she starts out in high school, graduates, becomes older, becomes an adult. It's kind of like a coming of age series that uses the vampires and monsters as allegories for things that you experience growing up. It's also got, a lot of intensity to it, a lot of great characters. Obviously, Angel is from that show. Spike is a great character. Willow's a great character. Faith, Eliza Dushku as Faith in season 3 of Buffy. Jesus, goddamn Christ. Anyways, that's besides the point. So I can't separate all these years of loving Buffy from myself. So it has to be my number 2 just because of my like personal experience. And then obviously that leads to number 1, which is Breaking Bad. Breaking Bad, what more is there to say? I actually have reviewed the entire series. I reviewed it season by season, and I also put out a gigantic review of the entire series. This show, unlike any other, just had me on the edge of my seat. Honestly, like this show had me reacting in a way that I've never really reacted to shows before. This show actually had me like jump off my couch before. This show had me enthralled. Literally, when they say watching something on the edge of your seat, that's how I was with Breaking Bad. Like I was literally so locked in that I was literally on the edge of my seat, like what the fuck is going to happen? And nothing can recapture your first experience watching Breaking Bad when you don't know what's going to happen, you don't know the twists and turns. And I feel really bad for anybody starting Breaking Bad now, because it's like, so much of the show has been memed or like spoiled and reaction images to things that happen. It's like, if you somehow don't know the things that happen in Breaking Bad, you don't know where it goes, you don't know what happens to certain characters, and you can watch it blind, please, for the love of God, watch Breaking Bad if you don't know what's going to happen, because the twists and turns and the big moments really affected me more than any other show. And, between the acting and the writing, everything about it, it's number 1 for a reason. Breaking Bad's the best. Anyways, guys, there you go. Those are my top 10 favorite TV shows of all time. Remember, favorite, not necessarily best, although Breaking Bad is the best, along with a bunch of honorable mentions. So let me know what you think of the list, and let me know your top 10 favorite TV show list down below. As always, guys, thanks for watching. I do appreciate it. Please give it a thumbs up and a comment to help it in the algorithm. Other than that, guys, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll talk to you next time.